One thing which I know I told you about was flying against the US Navy and their F-14s and their F-18s. In March '89, we went out with a detachment from the OCU of Tornadoes to Akrotiri in Cyprus. And we were there for our APC, Armament Practice Camp, where we learned to qualify NATO standard on the gun. And so we went out there. And while we were there, often we would get in touch with US Navy headquarters and say, do you want to do some dissimilar combat with your guys off the carrier? And in '89, I think the USS Theodore Roosevelt was out there, which is a big Nimitz class, number 4 in its class, called the Big Stick, and that was out there. And they said, will you work with the F-14s and F-18s? So we said, yeah, we'll be delighted. Well, it was an unfair fight, really. The 4 Tornadoes against 2 of those F-14s and 2 F-18s was never going to work. Our tactics were good, but the Americans, obviously, they had the Phoenix missile, 100 mile over the horizon, vertical down, Mach 5, was going to wipe you out. So we tried to ignore them or agree that the rules of combat were that once they'd fired their Phoenix, we would then close to close quarters. And of course the F-18 was a wonderful close quarter aircraft, and we held our own, but I wouldn't say with any huge success. I feel a bit more disappointed about that flying than my navigator, who seems to remember it with slightly more rose-tinted spectacles than I do. But the following year we went out in the April of '90 with a detachment of students because we were behind because of the bad weather. So we went out with our students, and while we were there, we said to the US Navy, would you like to do some more DACT? And they said, yes, please. 14s and 18s off the Midway class, Pearl Harbor, that's right. So we'd got a detachment of Hawks out with us, acting as targets, which is a cost-effective way of generating extra targets. So we went in what we know as MFF, Mixed Fighter Force. So there would be 2 Tornadoes and 2 Hawks, 1 Tornado with a Hawk on its wing, against 2 14s and 2 18s. So day 1, we went in, and what we would do is that we would find the targets on our radar, tell the Hawks where they were, drive as fast as the Hawks could go till they were close and they could see the 14s and 18s. Once they were tally, we would then plug in the burners, fire our Fox 1s, Skyflash, and we would run away safely to about 12 miles and then come back. The Hawks, I think the Hawk's like a Jack Russell Terrier, small, tenacious, aggressive, and it was snapping at the heels of the 14s and 18s and tying them up. And of course the Hawk had the AIM-9 lean rom as well, which was a good weapon. So it was getting its own share of kills. We would then go out to 12 miles, turn round, come back in, lock up, and in the target designator box in the head-up display, if you could see the target, it was a big target, therefore it was a 14 or an 18. If you couldn't see the target, it was a Hawk, so you broke the lock and locked to one that you could see. You'd then shoot that in the face with a Fox 1, and then we'd run away bravely and do the same again. So at the end of the day, 4-0 to the Brits, Americans lose. Terrific. Next day, we decided that the Americans wouldn't stick for this. They would probably do something different. So we decided, well, I didn't decide, but Fred, who was the QI in charge, decided that we would come in 10 miles split. 1 Hawk, 1 Tornado, 10 miles apart, rather than normally 3 to 5 miles visually. We were 10 miles laterally separated, and we would come in on a slight angle, which meant whichever package the Americans turned towards, they turned towards them, and therefore the other package was free, and they just came up behind them and shot him in the tail with their Cy-1ers or whatever. At the end of that day, Brits 4, Americans 0, tick in the box, go home. Day 3, new tactic, Americans came up 10 miles split. Surprise, surprise. We were now 20 miles split, which meant that when the Americans then tried to commit to package A or package B, the other package was then free to go and wreak havoc in their 6 o'clock, which is what we did again. Again, 4-0 to the Brits, and that was a much better detachment. The big thing about the Americans is, and I was saying in this book I'm writing, the Russians, is that they're very much more constrained to the tactics that they brief. they don't think as freely, or they're not as loud, not allowed to be as manoeuvrable and tactical inclined as the Brits were. And so although they were on a steep learning curve, we were one step ahead of them all the time. So of course Friday night we landed 4-0, so that was what, 12-0 for the week. We went to the bar and enthused our students with tales of daring do, and of course the bar, beer, the Americans dry ship, they lose again, don't they? So I'd rather be in the Royal Air Force. And who wants to land on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the night when it's blowing a gale? No thank you. So that was tactical deployment using dissimilar combat. Of course, as NATO, we flew against everything. We flew against Mirage 3s, Mirage bombers, 5s. Oh, I can't even think now. Everything that's in the inventory. F-15s, F-14s, A-10s, F-111s. Do you know, I'm a very lucky person. I think anybody who's flown in the Air Force, whether it's helicopters or transport, they've all got their tales to tell. They've all got their pleasures of rescuing people or taking aid into relief into a country. Anybody who joins the military, I think, has got themselves a terrific career. It's not probably gone that way recently with things like Afghanistan, which has brought a lot of heartache, and I appreciate there is a downside to every conflict. But me in particular and my fighter friends think we probably have the best of the Air Force, and we are very lucky people indeed, and I'm very grateful for having been allowed to do it, you know.